Today we're going to go through the basics of how to create a simple music animation using an audio editor and Blender. And in the end, you'll have everything you need to make a music animation just like this one. We're going to want two things, something where we can create our audio and something where we can create our visuals. I like using the Signal MIDI online MIDI editor app. It's basically like a virtual piano, lets us draw out notes, create custom songs, and it's the basis of how we're going to get our audio file for our animation. We're going to be using Blender. It's a free 3D animation software that you can find online, and basically it's going to allow us to create all the visual components we need and edit them and sync them along with the audio that we create. So I'm just going to start by drawing out a couple of notes, making a bit of a song. Doesn't have to be anything fancy. So feel free to just play around, create something new, or you can take inspiration from, say, a favorite video game, a movie theme, TV theme, or just a popular viral song, or just music that you like, or music of your own. Okay, so that's sounding pretty cool. So the first thing that we're going to do, this is perfect for a standalone animation. But if you wanted to turn it into a little bit more of like a song guessing game, then playing these notes, we've got 6 notes total here, playing them in groups and introducing more notes as you go is a really cool way of turning it into like a music guessing game. So let's just see what this sounds like. So what I'm going to do is I'm first just going to export it out as a WAV file, and this is going to be our original song file. Let's drag our song file and take it into Blender. So the first thing you're going to want to do in any default Blender environment is delete everything. And then you're going to want to do a horizontal split down here, open up this far left button and change this to the video sequencer. You can hold Control, drag on your mouse wheel and drag up, and then hold Shift, scroll down onto channel 1. Now find your song file that you just downloaded and drag it right onto the timeline. If you see peaks, that's great. That's set up exactly the way we want it to be. But if you don't, you can press N and display waveform. This is the basis for how we're going to do our animation. If we hit play, you can see that as this scrubs along the timeline, it plays each of our notes. This is just a visual representation of the audio that we generated from our file previously. So what we can do is we can actually use this waveform to animate. I'm going to drag it out just a couple of frames, just so it starts a little bit later. And to give ourselves a little bit more detail and clarity, you can see that each frame step takes quite a decent chunk. And some of these may not line up perfectly with an initial frame. So I'm going to change the frame rate to 60 frames per second for this animation. Depending on the speed of your song and the requirements, and particularly when it comes to rendering, a lower frame rate may save time, but for fluid, nice, detailed, dynamic animation, I recommend animating at 60 frames per second. Next thing I'm going to do is go to the end of our track here, and I'm just going to take note of our current frame and change our end frame to that. So now if we hit play, it's just going to scrub through the whole song right to the end and then loop back to the start. Next thing I'm going to do is minimize this down here, do another horizontal split, and I'm going to open up the graph editor. So now we've got our environment, we've got our song track here with the peaks in our waveform, and we've got our graph editor open. Just drag that over by 1. So our song starts at frame 10. So let's just bring in a default object. Just going to pick a UV sphere, and I'm going to give it an emission shader. So you can either do it on this tab here or move over to the shading tab. Let's change this to rendered view, add a shader. We're going to delete this principled BSDF shader. We're going to search for emission and drag this into the surface. Now if we come back to layout, we can control the brightness, change to rendered, and we can change the brightness of our object. So the basis for our animation is we want to start just before a note is hit. We want this to be 0 or 0.1. And then when the note's hit, we want it to flash brightly with color, or white's fine for now. So the way we could do this is just by animating here, inserting a keyframe, dragging along, dropping this back down to 1, back down to 0, adding another keyframe, and moving along the timeline. This is just the basics for how to create any animation based on the data that we have on hand. But rather than do it here, I'm going to create a new object, and I'm going to create an empty, and I'm going to rename this with L2, and I'm going to call this light control. Now let's just move this over. So I'm going to press G, X, 5. This is going to just put this to the right of our object. And we're going to use the Z height to control the brightness of this. What that will do is it will just mean that it keeps this graph data down here nice and clean, and it gives us something that we can edit from. Using controls is a great way to separate out and make sure that you don't have lots of complex keyframes on one object. But bear in mind that if you do add lots of controls, your scene can get quite cluttered. This won't be visible in the render view when we create our final object. So let's select this, and now we're going to go here and we're going to add a driver. Let's just change this to VAR, and then under our variable, we want to select our light control, and we want to go back in here, edit driver, and we just want to change this to Z location. So now when we raise this empty, this object will get brighter, and when we lower it down, it'll get darker. So what we're going to do is we're going to animate this with our graph editor to match our waveform up here. And we can do that simply by just going to our first frame, inserting a keyframe, ramping this up, and fading over the duration, dropping this back down to 0, inserting another keyframe. So now if we hit play, we've got the real basics of how our animation is going to come together. Then we want to do the same thing for our next one. So we'll line up our playhead at the start of this beat here. We can press Shift D, G, X, drag this along, and insert our next one. We want that to start right on that keyframe there. Do the same here. And last one for this first couple of notes. Really basic, simple animation. So this is the ball that's going to bounce around our scene. And the next thing we want to create is the shape that it's going to follow. So our next step is to create the line that this ball is going to travel on. So let's simply press Shift A and insert a circle. And we're going to press F9. And we want the vertices to be the maximum number of notes that we have in our song. Number of unique notes. For us, that's 6. So we're going to do 6 vertices, a radius of 5 meters. And we're going to rotate it on the x-axis by 90 so that it's facing the camera. Now what we want to do is right click and convert it to a curve. Then we're going to drop down this geometry tab and simply give it a little bit of depth. And play around the setting so you get the right number. 0.4 is probably a bit too much. 0.4 is looking okay. Then we're going to give it a new material. We're just going to increase the emission, say 5. That's going to give us a nice bright line to animate from. Now, an additional step you can do is go over to the shading tab, change this to world, and drop our color all the way down to black. That's going to give us that classic, clean, simple animation look. And the other thing is, in relation to the size of this, the ball's a little bit too big for now. So let's just change the scale down to say 0.4. Anytime we change the scale of something, we just want to press Ctrl A, reapply the scale, and that gives it the correct values for animating later. So now that we've got our end shape, we have a couple of options. We could just simply change the size of it, or rotate it to make it into a circle, into a square, but a clean way of doing it is using shape keys. So we're going to select our circle object, that's our hexagon, and we're going to insert 3 shape keys. Basis can stay as it is, that'll be our base hexagon, but we can rename it, call it hexagon. Then we're going to want a line. The line will represent our first 2 notes here, 1, 2, and then we want this one to be our square or diamond, and that will represent the second section, which is when we play 1, 2, 3, 4 of our notes. We're just going to drop back into solid view. If you want to make these different colors, you can simply press this drop down menu here and go random. And what we want to do is convert this shape into a line. So we're going to make sure that we've selected our line here in shape keys, and we're going to press tab. What we want to do is drag these vertices so that it makes a line. Now, rather than doing this by hand and just pressing G to move them, what we can do is highlight this bottom one, press Shift S, cursor to selected, and then we want to select everything but our top vertice, Shift S again, selection to cursor. So it's going to stay as a hexagon in object mode, but what we can do is drag this value up to 1, and the vertices will move to their assigned location where we moved them to in edit mode. So now we've got a line. So if we check rendered view, this is just the basics. We could move our ball up and down using G and Z, and you can see how our animation is going to start coming together. Let's just move this back to where it was by pressing Shift S world origin, clicking the ball, Shift S, selection to cursor. Now we want to make another shape key, but this time we want it to be a square. So if we press tab, it'll take us to edit mode, but we don't have somewhere currently right now to grab so that we can move our cursor to this point here. But what we can do is take the average of 2 points. So if we highlight both of these on the right, press S and go cursor to selected, this will move our 3D cursor to the middle, and we want 0.2 to be at this, and then we want 0.3 to be down here. So let's just move our 3D cursor, drag it out of the way, move our third point, take the middle of these, and then we're going to want 0.5 and 4. Vertice 1, 2, 3, and then we want 4, 5, and vertice 4, 5, and 6 to all be at this point. So we're going to hold shift, highlight all 3 of these vertices, and make our diamond. Now if we reduce the value on the line and increase the value on the square, you can see how just by simply dragging these back and forth, we've created the shapes that we need. Combining 2 shapes at once might make a very strange object, but if we were to keyframe these and drag them through at the same value at the same time, it would work out perfectly fine. So this doesn't look perfectly square actually, and I believe it's because the center of those 2 hexagon points wasn't actually the right spot. So let's just drag all of these, press X here, and we can type in 5. That'll move it over to the right point. And then we'll do the same for this, which will be -5. And that looks like it's fixed our square. Now we want to start introducing location. So what we're going to do is we're going to drag this back to 0, open the hexagon, and we're going to press tab, highlight this vertice, which we'll call vertice 2, and we'll go Shift S, cursor to selected, and let's add another empty. Shift A, empty, plain axes, F2, rename this empty _ 2. Let's do the same for up here. Rename it empty 1. Oops, helps if I can type, empty 1. And just while we're doing that, let's go through and create all of these. Okay, so we have our 6 empties. What we want to do is we can actually pair them to the vertices so that they'll move with our shape keys. So for now, I'm just going to move this over quite a far distance. Before we do this, we're just going to tidy up our scene collection here. So let's highlight all of our empties just by control clicking. Now we're going to press M, new collection, and call it controls. We can drag our light control in here as well. So now what we want to do is select our empty, and then holding shift, we're going to select this shape. Then we're going to press tab, highlight the vertice of where the empty is located, and then press Alt P. And that's going to pair the empty to this vertice. But the cool thing is, if we do that for all of these, so highlight empty, shift, tab, drag, Alt P, when we use shape keys, the empty moves with it. So that means when during this section of the song, our empty will be in the right spot for animating. So let's just pair all of these quickly. So empty, shift, click, tab, drag, Alt P. Make sure that you're not selected on the line, make sure you're selected on the original. So empty, shift, click, tab, drag, Alt P. These are automatically going to move based on our shape keys. So if it was a square, we can see that our empties are in the right spot. Empty 1, 2, 3, and 4 are located around the points of our shape. This works for any shape, and doesn't matter if you've got a song that only has 3 unique notes or 8 unique notes, you can use this same method. So now let's go back to our MIDI file and have a look when it transitions. Have a look when we want our transitions to be. So we want it to be right here, just before this third note plays. So in order to do this, we're going to drag our line all the way up, insert a keyframe, and we want to keyframe square as 0. Now, I like to do about 15 to 20 frames just for a nice smooth animation. And we're going to, so let's add 15, 20 frames to here. 16 will do. And let's increase our value on our square, insert a keyframe, and decrease our value on the line. So now we've got a nice smooth movement. Moves from 2 to 3 to 4. Let's move along. And at this next one, let's pick the exact frame that this beat starts. And we'll do the same thing. We'll insert a keyframe for our square, move 16 frames over, and we'll decrease our square to 0. So now we've got our transition, we've worked out how to make our light blink, and the empties will be following exactly where they need to go. So the next step is to just finish animating our sphere to blink on every single one of these notes and start to think about where this ball's going to be going based on the animation. So let's just quickly go through, select our light control, and finish animating this. These shorter notes we don't want to go for quite as long, so let's just make this tail a little bit shorter. And we can still just drag this, duplicate. Cool. So we've got all the animation data that we need for our light blinking in time with the music. And we're just checking to see if there's any mistakes or anything like that. This one's not quite long enough, so we can just drag it along. Perfect. So now we just want to do our locations. So we're going to take the ball, take our first empty, move it up there, and we're going to insert a keyframe every time our first note plays. This is where you will need to listen to the tune or look at your original MIDI file and just copy every time this A3 note plays. But it's basically the same principle, just slightly different. So we know that this is the next first one, and we're inserting the keyframe every time this light blinks on. So that would be 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. What's this tune here? It's just a nice repeating melody. That's all of our firsts. Now we'll just do our seconds. I want to move the 3D cursor to where our empty is, not the other way around. So now on our second note, we're just simply going to move the ball to the location. Then this time it'll be over here. Move the ball over, keyframe. And again, now this will be the location for our second empty. So we're just going to do this and repeat it for all of our empties until we've got all of the right bouncing and location data for our ball. So now we've got the location. But it's not really staying in the realms of our shape. And that's because this is got a Bezier interpolation. So if it sees a shape that it wants to move to in a location, it's going to swing in a nice path. Now for some animations that could make for a nice smooth animation, but for ours, we don't want that. So we're going to press A, V, we're going to change these to vector, and that'll give us a nice linear animation. So now what we want to do is simply duplicate our shape, make it 1.2 times bigger. This is going to give us the location for our text. So let's turn off the geometry for this shape just by simply removing that and removing the material. Let's bring in some text. Shift A, text, rotate X on 90, find our first point, move it up there, change this back to 0, press Tab to edit the text, change it to the number 1. We might just want to change the origin of this to geometry, just so it's in the center. And that's how we're going to make our text objects. Let's duplicate that and bring it all the way down. You want to move it all the way down to the bottom here, press Tab, change that to a 2. So now if we pair it the same way we paired our empties, this will move with our shape. So let's go over here, make sure that we're looking at the hexagon, go to our second point, move our number 2, and do the same. Press Shift, select our circle, in edit mode, highlight our vertice, press Alt P. Let's just carry on making the rest of our numbers. Let's duplicate the one that doesn't have a parent currently against it. Shift D, move it over, Tab, change it to a 3. Now we'll just finish parenting all of these. So select, Shift, select, Tab, drag, Alt P. So now if we've done that correctly and we go back to our front view, when we move this, our numbers will move with it. So we've got a nice smooth animation with moving numbers and blinking objects. In order just to fix this slight issue, we're going to pull these back on the y-axis. So let's just move. When they're here, we want them all to be back. So let's select our text objects. Basically what we want is we want the number 2 to be in its normal location. But we want the number 3. Helps if these are actually named correctly. We can do that by just simply renaming them here. Rename our object names. This will make dealing with them just a little bit simpler. And we're going to drag all of these just back slightly, 0.2. And let's just insert a keyframe Now when we move on to our second shape, we want this 3 to come forward. Just time this right. Keyframe. Wait till our shape's moved. We want number 4 to do this as well. Let's go back here. Wait till they've finished moving. Let's bring 4 forwards. Let's bring 3 forwards. Same thing, move to our next movement point. And we're going to do the same for 5 and 6. Insert a keyframe. Wait till they've stopped moving. And bring them forward slightly. So in our normal object view, they're still going to look like they're overlapping, but when we assign materials to these and fade them in, you won't see them. Let's do that now. Let's select our first one, new material, give it an emission. Let's just pick a random color, and we'll give it a strength of 1. We shift to rendered view, you'll see what we're looking at. So let's do the same for number 2, random color. Now 3, we want to wait. So we're still going to assign an emission, but based on its movement, that's when we want it to glow. So let's insert a keyframe here of 0. Assign our color. Once it's moved into position, we'll then ramp that up to 1. You won't see the number 3, and it will just start to appear and come into view. Let's do the same thing for the number 4. Shader, color, 0, keyframe, move to the right keyframe, increase out, and 5 and 6 will follow the exact same thing. So let's just match these locations we already have for our movement. Create a material, color, 0, same for 6, color, 0, move these over, and increase this to 1. So there we have the absolute basics of making a musical animation entirely from scratch here in Blender. Now you can add a lot of action events. So for instance, every time this hits this location, we could increase the scale to make it bigger or smaller. You can add your logo, and you can play around with the camera. So in order to add a camera, we're just going to press Shift A, camera, and we want to pull that back to the world view, and we're just going to drag this so it's coming all the way back here, maybe -32. Now we can adjust this further. Now everything is in view. So if we hit play, our full animation. Now if you want this to just have a little bit of visibility, then we can go back to our original light control, and all of these bottom ones, let's highlight all of them, and let's move them up by about 0.15. So now the ball won't completely fade to black, and you can still see and follow it along the animation. Now if you want, you can just simply find somewhere to output your render. I do recommend, normally I would recommend only outputting it as an image sequence, but just due to the basic nature of this one and using Eevee Blender, I don't think we'll run into any issues if we automatically output to a video. And if you want your sound, you can come down here to the audio codec, change that to AAC, and you can increase the bitrate if you want to, but 192, 256 is fine. If you want to make this into shorts material, you just want to swap these values around. But for now, let's just keep it landscape, and we'll render out our animation. So there we have it, a really simple animation of a song that we created ourselves using a MIDI editor. A really simple animation of a song that we created ourselves just using an online MIDI editor. and a full animation made in Blender and rendered ready for upload. If you guys want to see more, leave a comment below and I can go into in-depth or answer any questions that you have. And next time I'll show you how to use the scripting tab and write Python code that will allow you to automate a lot of these steps based off this MIDI file. Thanks guys, hope you enjoyed, and feel free to leave a like, comment, subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks very much.